The most evil human experiments in history. Nutrition experiment. Between the 1940s and 1950s, Canadian government officials and researchers conducted nutrition experiments on Indigenous children living in residential schools. And to be very clear right from the start, this was not a case of accidental neglect. This was deliberate starvation carried out in the name of science. Many of these children were already malnourished due to poverty and forced displacement. Instead of helping them, researchers saw an opportunity. Food rations were intentionally reduced even further. Milk was cut or completely removed. Essential vitamins like vitamin C were withheld. The goal wasn't to improve health. It was to observe what vitamin deficiencies would do to a growing human body over time. These children weren't patients, they were control groups. It gets worse. Dental care was intentionally denied so researchers could track how malnutrition affected tooth decay and gum disease. Imagine being a child in constant pain, unable to eat properly, and being told this was normal. No treatment, no relief, just observation. All of this was documented in clean, professional language, written up in reports that treated suffering as data points and children as numbers. Parents were never properly informed. Consent was never given. Government officials were aware of what was happening and allowed it to continue because acknowledging the harm would have meant admitting the entire residential school system was fundamentally broken, which it was. San Quentin prison experiments. Between 1960s and 1970s, San Quentin State Prison, one of the most infamous prisons in the United States, became a favorite testing ground for researchers during the mid-20th century. And not because it had cutting-edge facilities or eager participants, but because it had a steady supply of men who had almost no power to refuse. Prisoners at San Quentin were routinely used in medical and scientific experiments that ranged from questionable to outright horrifying. One of the most infamous involved testicular irradiation, where inmates were exposed to radiation in order to study sterilization and the effects of radiation on the human reproductive system. That's right. Scientists were literally cooking prisoners' reproductive organs in the name of research. Others were injected with experimental drugs. Now, on paper, these prisoners were considered volunteers. But that word is doing a lot of heavy lifting here. Participation often came with incentives like small cash payments, better living conditions, or most dangerously, the promise of reduced sentences. And when you're locked in a concrete box with no real future, those offers stop feeling optional. The long-term consequences for these inmates were rarely tracked. Many developed chronic illnesses, cancers, and other complications years later. Once the data was collected and the studies were published, the subjects themselves were quietly forgotten. No follow-up care, no compensation, no accountability. Science moved forward, careers were built, and the people who paid the price were left behind bars. What makes the San Quentin experiments especially disturbing is how normalized they were. Universities, government agencies, and research institutions all knew what was happening, and many actively supported it. At the time, prisoners were viewed less as human beings and more as convenient, disposable test material. If something went wrong, well, they were criminals anyway. At least that was the logic. And the worst part? These experiments helped shape modern medical knowledge. So every time you hear someone talk about ethical guidelines in research today, just remember, they exist because places like San Quentin proved exactly what happens when science is allowed to operate without them.